to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle that we offer every Saturday from Still and Moving Center. And I want to start today with a quote from the periodical Hermes. And this has to do with our theme of the language of the soul. In deep sleep, the immaculate imagination may recover the forgotten language of the soul. Forgotten language of the soul from deep sleep. Interestingly, our original topic for conversation, which I think we can actually a little bit later in our conversation, is the language of the future. And I transformed that conversation and asking Cliff to give our presentation today to the language of the soul. Cliff is someone who has studied language to a great degree. He graduated from UC Santa Barbara with his BA in English, having studied for a short time ancient Greek, and then for a year with a master Sanskritist, the language of Sanskrit. So it's something that is close to his soul, this idea of, I think, how we use with care these living messengers called words, and a quote from William Quan Judge. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Cliff and let him share with us what he has to offer.
Well, I found it a really intriguing topic to think about, and I hope we have a pretty lively conversation about it. I'd love to hear everybody's views on this subject. So I did mention it to Renee casually over dinner one night that, oh, that's going to be an interesting topic. If you don't have anyone to do it, I'll apply some thought to it. And careful what you say in dinner conversation, because sometimes it comes true. So here I am giving the talk or the presentation on it. But I would like to say right off the bat, I think this discussion, it ties in really well with last week's discussion on reverence for life that Bob Buss did, because I don't think you can really have or tap into the language of the soul without a reverence for life. And Bob Buss exemplified that in his very soulful discussion last week, which I found very, very inspiring. So again, thank you, Bob, for that talk on reverence for life. The other thing I wanted to share is I'm finding both Renee and I, as grandparents, we look forward to any excuse to talk about our grandkids. And I think this is universal, that most grandparents love to talk about their grandkids. So excuse me for this little bit of a divergence into the topic, but we were, again, at the dinner table on Wednesday night with our two grandchildren. And just kind of out of the blue, I mean, normally our oldest grandson, who just turned 6, normally stays away from his vegetables, so much. He doesn't really go after those, but he was diving into his salad this night. And then all of a sudden, he just makes a statement. He just goes, "Did you know the Hulk is a vegetarian?" And we go, "No, we didn't know that. Is that why he's green?" He goes, "Yeah, that's why he's green." And then after another moment, he goes and makes this other statement, which is kind of like a Zen koan. He goes, "Strength and power are not the same thing." And I would go, "Oh, they're not the same?" No, they're quite different. And I lost it at that point, but maybe Renee continued the conversation about that. But it got me thinking about this idea of powers. And our grandkids, their favorite game when they come over to our house is to get chased around our living room and kitchen area, and they get to have all these superpowers. And so when we're about to catch them, they will do spider webs all over us, or they'll freeze us in place, or they'll create some invisible barrier that we can't go beyond because they have these superpowers. And so I just started thinking, well, what is it about kids and superpowers and superheroes? They just love superheroes. But to tell you the truth, so many of our movies these days are about superheroes with the Marvel comics, with Iron Man and Spider-Man and Wonder Woman and all these amazing superheroes. And, we had the Star Wars with all that. They had so many superheroes and supervillains. But it's true of all cultures, like Hawaiian culture, Mary, has Maui and Pele and all their powers. And of course, the ancient Greeks and the Indian traditions are all these beings with all these superpowers. And I started to think about this idea of what are these superpowers and why are we so drawn to them? And I started to think that, in these movies and so forth, what's really intriguing about them, number one, for me, is these innate powers that some beings have, they still have to develop them. And that's often one of the more captivating parts of the movie as these superheroes start to unfold or develop their superpowers, usually under the guidance of a teacher like Yoda or something. They stumble around and make all these mistakes with their superpowers. Superman crashes and burns, Spider-Man sends spider webs all around his bedroom. And I think Wonder Woman, had all kinds of problems too. But it's interesting that as one of these beings develop their powers, it's not easy at first. They have to figure it all out. And then also, it seems that once they do develop their powers, they become like second nature to them. It's like, yeah, I just shoot webs all around, or yeah, I just fly around. That's just who I am. So I started to think that, well, do we have superpowers, and what would they be? And then I started thinking about what Jesus says in some of the Gospels. I believe, Mary, it's Mark, Matthew, and Revelations. He says in those three Gospels at least, he says, those who have ears to hear, let him hear. And that's such a mysterious thing. Maybe you'll have some thoughts on that, but when I thought about it, I go, well, I guess hearing happens on different levels. There's hearing on the outside, and you might hear language on the outside, but there must be some other hearing and this other kind of language going on that's deeper. And only if one is developed this ability to hear can one actually hear the real language, the real teachings. And there's this other saying, I guess, about, let's see, let me leave my thoughts here about language, that it seems like language is something that's kind of like, I don't know, deep inside of us. As human beings, that's what makes us in many ways human beings, is this ability to use language. And when you stop to think about language itself, it's like when I come up in my mind with something to say, I have to formulate it into words, which are tones or vibrations. And then as I speak it, I'm sending out various tones, and then you are registering them as words. So just this ability that we have to communicate through language is, I think, incredibly mysterious, incredibly amazing, and potentially a superpower. It's just that we've taken it for granted. Oh, yeah, well, we can just talk all the time, but we don't really thought about how powerful our language is. And if you look at some of the religious traditions, in these religious traditions, they are saying that language is also part of the universe we live in, or like, I think it's in the first verse of John, Mary, that where Jesus is saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Super mysterious statement. And then in the Eastern tradition, the idea of the Om, this reverberation of this monosyllable, the Om, throughout the entire universe is like this the Word. So it's also said there, Pythagoras talks about the music of the spheres. So the roots of language are rooted in us, but also rooted in the universe as a whole. There's this beautiful poem in the Rig Veda that I asked Renée to share, which I think says a lot about perhaps the language of the soul. And I just want to read it. It's about the goddess Vak, who is the goddess of speech. And so I'm just going to read this one poem because it's just, to me, it's always been one of my most favorite poems, I guess, or verses. And it's all about language. And it says, when, O Lord, the word, the wise established name-giving, the first principle of language, their inmost excellence, pristine and pure, hidden deep within, was brought to light through love. When the wise created language with the mind, as winnowing ground barley with a sieve, friends acknowledged the essence of friendship. Upon their speech was impressed the mark of grace. With devotion, they walked the path of the word, which they saw abiding within the seers. They drew it out, ordering it all ways, the word which the seven singers exalt. Many a man who sees does not see the word, and many a man who hears does not hear it. Yet for another, Vak reveals herself like a radiant bride yielding to her Lord. Another man is apt to be uncaring, unmoved, ever to act with daring, all tangled in vain imaginings. The word he hears bears no flower or fruit. He who forsakes a companion in knowledge lacks every avenue for sharing the word. In truth, what he hears to no avail. He cannot perceive the path of right action. To all companions are eyes and ears bestowed, yet each man differs in the quickness of his mind. Some are like deep, refreshing lakes, others, alas, like shallow pools. When men of the word companions worship, refining in their hearts flashes of insight, some attain awareness of knowledge, others wander mouthing empty words. Those who move neither forward nor backward are not men of the word, nor refiners of essence. Poor craftsmen mishandling the word, spinning frail threads of self-regard. All companions rejoice in their victorious friend, finding fulfillment at the journey's end. Nourishing them, he eases their pain, for he is ever ready to venture forth. While one man adds to the store of sacred verse, another sings hymns to banish confusion. The man of the word gives knowledge of what is, and another gives measure to worship. I just think that's just very, very beautiful and very appropriate to this idea of the language of the soul. So I thought maybe before I ask questions about what is the language of the soul, I thought, what is the language about the soul that we use? And it's interesting that when we say the soul, it seems to me, just in my own opinion, that it might get us off on the wrong foot. That when we use the word it kind of almost leans us toward thinking of the soul as something. It's a substance, or it has a material quality to it. And you often hear that that we have a soul, But in the Eastern traditions, very often they don't speak that way. They don't speak of us having a soul so much as being soul beings, that we are soul beings, and that the soul is not so much material. It doesn't have so much substance to it. It's very, very mysterious, but it's who we are as beings. We are soul beings. There's that wonderful saying by Teilhard de Chardin that we are not human beings that have a spiritual experiences. We're spiritual beings that are having a human experience. So if indeed we are as our nature soul, it's like this quality of ours is through and through our being. It's like a thread. They talk about it in the East as the sutratma, that this thread soul that goes through all the different layers of our being. Or it could be thought of as, the soul could be thought of as like a ray of light that is individual, and yet universal at the same time. And I was thinking also of when I pick up our grandkids, sometimes after school, and Ryder, our oldest one right now, he has soccer practice. After that, we'll go to this frozen yogurt place. They're always, are we going to go to Froyo or are we going to go to Froyo? And so we go to Froyo, and you can get these different flavors of frozen yogurt, and they like to pull the levers themselves. And so there'll be like one color on this side and one color on that side. And now they have found that if they pull the lever in the middle, they get a swirl of both flavors at once. And so they're all into that, the double swirl. And I was thinking that might be a good analogy for the spiritual and material sides of our nature, that they're interlocked. They're on all the different levels of our being, our physical or more astral being, our emotional being, our mental being, and our higher, deeper level beyond the intellectual or mental being, which is more like the witness plane. We have a body to that, as well as a spiritual or more light quality, more to it. And then they blend together at all the different levels. So what is it then? What can we say about the language of the soul? And I thought, well, let's start by saying what it's not. And that's really easy. Hateful speech is not the language of the soul. Prideful speech is not the language of the soul. Selfish speech, backstabbing, envy, all these things obviously are not the language of the soul. So what could we say? Well, in this hymn Devak, it talks about, gentle speech, caring, compassionate speech. These are certainly could be tied into being soul, using language in a soulful way. But I thought, just to get the conversation started, I'd try and say, in essence, what to me this idea of the language of the soul is. And I came up with this idea, and I shared it with Jonathan, who's in that room right there the other day, that to me, see if I can remember what I said.
It has something to do with connecting with the highest in somebody else, I thought.
Yeah, that's exactly what it did. It I don't know, I got stuck on this word now. It's usually when I get hang up on a word, then I forget the word. But it's the language of being able to recognize and relate to another human being at their deepest level. That's kind of that's what I was trying to drive at.
Were you thinking of the word empathy?
No.
Oh.
Not, it was more like,
You use the word recognize a lot. I
yeah,
thought.
but okay, so I forgot my key word, but the point about the key word, I can go to the definition of it, is that when we are able to speak in a way that we can touch another person's depth, that to me is the language of the soul. And oftentimes that language isn't in words. It could be, that language can be achieved through the look of the eyes, facial expressions, all these different subtle things that we have as our power to relate to another person at their deepest level. When we are able to do that, to truly relate to another person at their deepest level, I think in some sense we are tapping the language of the soul. And it's an art. It's kind of like what Thoreau was saying about, it's one thing to have being able to paint a picture or carve a statue, but it's another thing to actually create the atmosphere in which we live in, and being able to be in tune with another human being at that deeper level, beyond their emotional planes, beyond our emotional planes and mental planes, and have that wonderful feeling of connection, whether we're using words or not. we are communicating with the language of soul when we find that bond of unity between us. So that's basically my thoughts on, but I really didn't want to speak too long. I really want to hear everyone else's thoughts on this subject. What does the language of the soul, this theme mean to you? And I'm really anxious to hear what everyone else has to say on this subject.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cliff. You really got us off to a beautiful start. Well, of course, I like to talk about my grandchildren too. However, you did touch on some really amazing things, and this idea of a superpower, and are sometimes becoming so accustomed to the fact that we've got it, we don't even realize that we do have a superpower. And what I was wondering, if I could use as a start-off question is, when do you know that you are hearing the language of the soul? When do you know? What are the markers? How does it make you feel?
I'm not sure if this was the word that Cliff was trying to reach, but one of the markers, I think, is resonance. When something is done and you resonate with it, the vibration or quality of being one with, without necessarily concepts being involved, but just a resonating sense.
Thank you. Yes, beautiful.
I was thinking about people talking about a younger person saying he's an old soul. I think those people that are called old souls are the ones who, you say, resonate a lot with people. They seem to have some ability to do that. And sometimes I don't think it's exactly learned. It's just there sometimes for people.
So this ability to feel a certain resonance, a certain oneness with someone else.
When they talk about people with an old soul, as an old soul, the way I think of it is that person has this ability to connect with not just one person, but they have this ability to make those connections better than most of us do.
Right. Thanks. Diana.
For me, I don't know that I know it, but I know it. There's a feeling in my heart that I know it, not that I know it, understand it. And for me, when I feel that resonance with another person, there's almost like a presence. We're both in a present moment together. We're both experiencing something in that moment that's kind of beyond time and space. But for me, when I feel that connection or that resonance, like you said, there's something in the subtlety of eyes and being present. I think it's an energetic presence, and there's a feeling of being seen for who I am or understood, because most people, when they talk, they either don't listen or they don't reflect back. They're too busy thinking about what they're going to say next. So when you're with someone that really cares and just feel it, it's like they care what you're saying and who you are and what they do, and they want to know. And sometimes that's just in sitting quietly or doing meditation together or prayer together. But it's like you're on a different wavelength, a frequency together, and it feels like it's a feeling, not a head knowing, but there's a click that happens when I feel the language of the soul. And I think there is a really deep connection. The other time when I feel like I'm, I don't use the language of the soul, but when I feel like I'm really present with someone, sometimes I feel like I'm channeling, like it's coming through me. I don't even know what I'm saying, sometimes. And I need them at lesson as much as they do, if not more, especially when I'm doing counseling. It's like I feel like I'm totally present there. There's nothing else but the other person. And you never know what's going to come up. And so it's like a total presence and just trusting that what I say and do is mirroring back or present in a heartfelt, because I care and love them, that I'm doing that. And I feel that that's a real gift that we share with different people. And you know the difference if they really care versus, oh, they're really more interested in sharing their story. So that's how I feel the language of the soul.
So you have a sense of experiencing it, not just from hearing it, feeling it from someone else, but there's also an experience of it coming through yourself. And there's almost a kind of a sense of awe, like, right? I didn't know I knew that.
Why the heck did I say that? And then they say, oh, that's so profound. And I didn't even know what I said. It's like, I think there is something that's a presence and a gift I'm feeling, that when I can really connect with someone, that those happens both ways. It's not just a one way, it's a mutual touching in on souls.
Yeah, two-way street on that. Yeah, that's wonderful. David.
Yeah. As often happens when Diana is speaking, I'm resonating. Thank you, Bob, for that. And she speaks the language of what I often talk about in terms of flow. And I've often thought that the next stage of human evolution is where flow state is much more common for us, where we are experiencing things in that way of what they say in flow state, STER, selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness are these states of flow that we tap into. And I think as we're evolving, we're learning how to elicit flow state within ourselves. So thank you, Diana, for bringing up my favorite topic. But I was thinking also in terms of polarity. In a battery is useless unless both ends are connected. And so there's that potential energy in there. But if you just plug in one end, nothing is going to happen until you plug the other end in. And then you've got that flow, you've got that current. So I think when we listen to a person in a way that we're listening to what they have to say, we're allowing that energy to flow from them, which could be something that is rather stuck within them. And why it's so healing to be able to listen to somebody from that place is it allows them to release things that may be stuck within them. So I think the language of the future is this language of the soul, where bringing it back into psychological terms, the internal family systems, he talks about that there are these parts of us, this multiplicity that makes us who we are. There's parts of us that are inner critics, or the inner child, and there's the little devil and the little angel, and there's all these parts of us. But separate from the parts, there is the self. And in yogic terms, we call it true nature. I think Schwartz calls it the core self. But the core self is kind and compassionate, empathetic, all the beautiful things that we think about in nature that are life-giving and life-supporting. And Cliff, when you started off talking about the tea for the plants, the funguses that are being reintroduced to the soil, it got me thinking about that other aspect of nature, particularly in the kingdom of the fungus, where half of the kingdom is all about this connectivity. It's about bringing all the trees of the forest together and sharing the goodness. But there's a whole other branch of the funguses, which are all about tearing things down. And when you mentioned sort of like hateful language and this idea of, I wonder if you take it to a whole nother plane, that there is inherently nothing wrong with or destructive about those, what we call destructive forces of nature. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
What were those 5 things about flow state? Selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness. What was the other one?
Richness, STER.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for going to the next question that I wanted to ask, and that doesn't stop anyone from sharing their experience of the language of the soul. Like, when do you know when you're experiencing it? So if you still want to comment on that, you're so welcome. And I just wonder what you think of this little flip of the mind that I did when I told Cliff that the topic of the week was the language of the soul, instead of telling him it was the language of the future, which is what's written in our almanac.
There's so much on my mind, I don't know where to begin. And I'll just say, David, those funguses or fungi are the great recyclers, aren't they? That breakdown is so necessary. Anaximander, the ancient Greek, saying everything that forms in nature incurs a debt, which it must repay by dissolving so that other things may form. And of course, the fungi are the great dissolvers. Anyway, Cliff, my heart and mind are all kind of reeling, because just before this session, I also heard another one on sound by Stuart Pearce, and got so sucked into trying to decide whether to take his workshop or not. And you're like confirmation that I think I could, even if I can't afford it. But much of my adult life has been guided by Seth, Jane Roberts Seth. And Seth, of course, spoke very clearly, listing all the inner senses. And you in your own language, you were talking about all kinds of things that suggest that you know very well what you were asking for. I loved your metaphor of the swirling yogurt, the physical and spiritual intertwined. I, as you all know, I think, am hooked on distinguishing communication from communion. That communication are the human languages we've evolved, whether they are word languages or symbol language, other symbols, or dance or whatever. But then the communion is the deeper level. And that's what you have with the trees. If you didn't have that communion with the trees, you wouldn't have gone to such great lengths to save those trees in Lahaina. So you know very well what you're looking for. Other people have touched on it with resonance and heart knowing. When those messages come through, you know it instantly. Maybe that's one of the distinguishing features. It's so instant. It doesn't take any time. There's no analysis involved. It's such a deep knowing. So many things. Another of my favorite authors are Inayat Khan. The whole thing about cosmic sound being on much higher levels even than light, that in the beginning was the word thing, that there's cosmic sound, and then there's light, and then there's plasma and matter forming. So I've been doing a lot of studying of plasma recently to try to figure out whether it's fair to fit it into my keyboard between matter and energy. And for a while I thought it was different, but now I see that, yes, it's very appropriate to stick it there in the keyboard. Anyway, I've said enough for now, so let's go on. What your second question was, what, Renee?
How did I happen to switch the language of the future into the language of the soul?
Oh, okay. Well, I think the future is picking up on some things from the past. Another of my favorite books is Amazon Beaming, which is about the human capacity to do both communication and communion. Again, that's the swirl of the yogurt, which melts together pretty quickly. But anyway, it's that whole concept of what so many indigenous cultures had. The Amazon Beaming book is about a culture encountered by a modern human who got downed in his airplane. He was a National Geographic explorer, and he ended up with a tribe that he had no language in common with. And one day, braiding a lanyard in grasses while the chief was sitting next to him making a bow or arrows, he suddenly got a question, and he thought for a minute he was going crazy, and then he decided, well, he'd answer it in his mind for the fun of it or something. And then the next question came in. It became a conversation, and he discovered that way why these people, this tribe, didn't do a lot of talking. They did much less talking than you would expect in a normal human culture. And it was because they could do both communion and communication. So they were perfectly in touch with each other. And when he got invited to go to the source, he didn't know, was it the source of knowingness, right? The soul language, or were they following the stream up to a physical source? So lots of interesting stuff in that book, Amazon Beaming. Enough from me.
Thank you so much. Wow. Sounds like one I really want to pick up. Jonathan, I see your hand up.
The light's not. I have a question that I think ties in with a lot of the other comments and questions. Cliff, when you were speaking and you were looking for that word recognition, and first of all, by the way, I really appreciate that long conversation we had the other day. It's just really helpful. I was wondering, I guess one way to say the question is, how do you do communion and communication at the same time? Let me clarify. Another thing has to do with what's going on with healing speech and healing communication. When you have an ability, Cliff, to kind of recognize the highest in a person when you're talking to them, but also, you know, you're shrewd enough to know what's up with the limitations of a person. And so the question has to do with, how do you work with both? In other words, you tend to adore the sheer divinity within a person, and at the same time you kind of know what's going on. And I wonder if that has anything to do with what you've been able to do with homeless people. I wonder if that has anything to do with some of the magic that you're trying to do with those trees, you know, now I'm having a brain problem. Banyan trees, thank you. So in other words, like even with the banyan tree, you remember that banyan tree when you were a child, and you adore that tree in a way. The beauty and the perfection and all the complexity and the unity of that amazing tree that's given so much joy to so many people. And now you're seeing it just all burn up. But you're working with both somehow. Anyway, if you're able to decipher a question in there, I'd appreciate you address it.
Wow. I mean, thank you, Jonathan, for that question. It triggered in me. I finally remembered what the word was that I was trying to come up with. And for me, the language of the soul is the language of recognition. And the thing about the soul, it's such a enigma that, especially in the East, we have an individual soul, and yet we are part of the universal self. There's both things going on. There's individuality and universality in our nature. And somehow, and going back to Nancy's point earlier about the old souls, in reading this article, the Theosophical article on the language of the soul, the writer of that article, Robert Crosby, talks about that what distinguishes us as individuals is our experiences. And whilst we all have experiences, some seem to learn more from their experiences than others. And so it's like what makes us individual is this unique journey that each of us is on. And yet it's a journey where there's this universal side of ourselves. And being able to recognize that, to be able to truly recognize that in another person, doesn't mean you aren't aware of the struggles they're going through, the suffering that they're having, but you're able to, like Diana was saying, tap into, for a moment maybe, something of their inner nature that's common, as Elizabeth was saying. There's that communion between what is similar or one in both of us. There's like that, and as what David was talking about with the idea of making a circuit. So that's a challenge, especially with the homeless, because it's so easy to start having this sense of otherness. Well, even the saying, "There but for the grace of God goes I," is wrong. It's better to say, "There goes I," to get beyond any form of separation between oneself and another in any context. Whenever one meets another human being, to have that, be able to touch something that we both share in common, which is the one self. That's the language of recognition. And that's the challenge that we have before us in every single encounter we have throughout every single day. When we're at the cashier, or dealing with someone, a waiter, a waitress, or a bus driver, or every single human being we come in contact with, is to be able to touch that divine nature in them. But it requires a preparation on our part in order to do so. And of course, that living nature is in all forms of life, including trees. So I didn't know I had such a strong connection or relationship with a tree until I thought that tree was no longer going to exist, and then that just broke my heart. And I guess from that, I just just got stirred into action to see what could happen. But I didn't know I had such a strong relationship. And sometimes we don't know how strong our relationships are until we have the thought that it may no longer be there, or it is no longer there. We can't take our relationships for granted.
But then
That's a roundabout answer to your question, John.
the other thing that you did, I think, was you released something in the former homeless people to help new people that had become homeless in the fire. I mean, maybe they did it themselves, but somebody released something in them, and that might have something to do with the language, perhaps.
Well, just in brief, what Jonathan's referring to is, especially this woman in Waimanalo, who's just incredibly amazing, Blanche McMillan, she created a village for those transitioning out of homelessness in her backyard. And there's about 100 people living there that were once homeless and now are no longer homeless. They have their own houses, and they have their residences of this kauhale, they call it, a village here in Waimanalo, of a bunch of mini homes and a communal kitchen, communal bathrooms, and a huge garden. But when they heard these people that were chronically homeless for a decade, 2 decades, or now, and it was just so amazing to watch them regain their self-worth and dignity in this context of mutual support, and especially the loving care of Blanche and her family. When they heard about the people losing their homes in Lahaina, and therefore no longer having homes, they were homeless, they went to work, and because they had a whole donation center there, and a food bank and everything, they put out the word through the Coconut Wireless here in Hawaii, as well as our daughter-in-law, who was more in tune with social media. Next thing you know is like a drive-through place, and just cars backed up, bringing all these donations to this village of previously homeless people. and they filled up 17 40-foot containers with all this amazing stuff. And now they have this whole distribution thing going on over in it was crazy, the outpouring of love, but mainly all directed by people that previously didn't have any homes. They were previously homeless people. So it was very, very inspiring thing to be a part of.
Yeah, so they would not just take it in, then they would sort through it to categorize it. And then it was a matter of putting it onto pallets of the right size. And then they had to wrap the pallets with the shrink wrap to make sure they would stay on there. And they had to do that for 17 containers worth of donations. Mary, what were your thoughts that you might want to add to this? When do you recognize the language of the soul, or to what extent do you think language of the soul is the language of the future, or what are your thoughts?
I just was thinking that it's so wonderful to pay it forward. And that's what Blanche and her community have done. They're paying it forward. And we've all been in that situation where, you know, we needed something, we needed someone, and somebody stepped up. And then we've had the other part where we see somebody in need and we do what we can for them. I loved your talk, Cliff. Thank you. I was thinking of Dave the whole time you were talking, because language was his forte. He loved language. He was a linguist, and he would be able to resonate with your talk in a different way than I did. And it's so true that you can say something to a whole crowd of people, and each person will have a different interpretation of it. And I hope and I believe that if we can accept what we hear, we don't have to agree with it, but we certainly have to be kind, and we must not be rude. And in our culture right now, it's so reactionary. And you know, if there's always that saying, you know, I say up, you say down, I say black, you say white, the sky is blue, nope, the sky is green. So I just hope and pray that whatever happens in the people that we come in contact with, that we will show them courtesy and respect. Amen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it does point to the two-way street that we were talking about with Diana, that the language of the soul, it's as if it can't be spoken, it can't be expressed unless there is someone there to receive it, to listen to it. It's very much like also like David was talking about, the battery has to be connected at both ends for that circuit to be connected and for it to exist at all.
Well, I'm really going inward, and like Diana, I feel a lot. It's a feeling that I get when I'm connected to my true self, and I'm more aware of it. Comes to me like the ego mind is like, oh, I think that's more ego than my true self. And you know, the competitive nature that I have, I think, is more ego than my spiritual connection. And I pray that the language of the future is the language of our, you know, soul, our soul nature, which is healing and beautiful and has solutions, because we're connected to this beautiful energy. So I think that was a beautiful way to focus us on the future, is to focus ourselves on our souls. So way to go, Renee.
Oh, I did it on purpose.
Funny, at least at least twice, maybe three times in this conversation, just as Cliff was about to say something, the words would pop into my head about therefore go the grace of God and us. So like there's some deep connection. But when Cliff was searching for that word in the beginning, I reached into ChatGPT and said, you know, what is a word for this this thing? And I said, what did I say? A word for the deepest level of human connection. And it came up with intimacy. In other words, bond, unity, oneness, and then communion, which tied right back into Elizabeth's contribution as well, that notion of communion. But then he mentioned this word recognition. And as I mentioned last week's talk about the recognition sutras, and I'm thinking about this very ancient language that you've studied, and the word namaste, which apparently has a literal meaning of I bow. But in the greater meaning, it means I bow in recognition of the oneness that we share, that we are both divine spirits. And so it's that recognition of that in each other. And I just got the goosebumps. So yeah, I think that may relate to what Renee was saying about how do you know when you when you're in that communication or when you hear the truth, and like Diana said, you just know it. There's a deep sense of knowing that's beyond cognition, you might say. So, thank you, Cliff, and everyone.
Well, it's kind of related to what David just said, but when I heard the idea that the topic was going to be the language of the soul, I was thinking about how language actually works. And one of the things that came up for me was a philosopher named Heidegger talked about language and truth, aletheia. And he went, in a sense, as deep as he possibly could. And he said, thinking about truth isn't really it. Thoughtful consideration is interesting. From the poem that Cliff started with, grace is kind of an interesting idea. And so Heidegger keeps looking at this word aletheia, which usually in Greek translates as truth. In Latin, it would be veritas. But he says at its root, if you go deep enough, it's unconcealment. And unconcealment and revealing are very related. Light coming forth is very much a part of it. It's connected to life. It's connected to presencing, becoming present. And so he keeps working on all of these connotations of language that take him deeper and deeper into a kind of a common understanding. And I find that use of language really interesting. We don't discover the truth. We don't find the truth. We don't even cognize it. We recognize it, as Cliff was saying, recognition. If you have eyes, you see. If you have ears, you can hear. That relates to the truth. We are beings looking for the being of beings, is how Heidegger put it. But that's much, if you're a Christian, you would say that's God. That's the God that connects us to the sense of truth. And so, there's a constant, and it's because we are animals that are connected, but also we have language, and language helps with that connection. It's not expressing, it's going deep into it, recognizing it. I found that whole dynamic really interesting, although it's just so amazing to watch someone who loves language digging into really root and core meanings of what the terms really mean. That it's uncovering, that it's unhidden. And at one point, Heidegger says, it's like walking through a forest and coming upon a clearing. That's aletheia. That's the opening of whatever it is we're searching for. And it has that sense of searching for what ultimately might be our true nature through language. And it's always a wonderful game to deal with language, and it's never ending.
Hi everyone. This is my first time, not just in this program, but actually at the center. Hijina is the one who, kind of recommended me the, I came to her class today at 11, and then I was just curious to see what else is out there, and, kind of signed up for this class. And I mean, I love the center. I'm going to look, at the schedule, and just, I just love the idea and the concept. I already sent a link to my friend, and I said, you have to come here. This is like a really, really interesting place. So I'm kind of new to, to all these concepts and everything, but I really like what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling. So thank you for this space.
Absolutely. Well, it's welcome, 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 Eikomo Mai. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel as if I spent 9 years on the island before opening Still and Moving Center, and it was only upon opening Still and Moving Center that I began meeting people with whom I would say that I had this soul connection.
Right.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It kind of it's as if Still and Moving Center has this drawing power.
It certainly does. Very much so. I'm glad I discovered it.
Yes, we're glad too. I was thinking for myself, what is the experience that makes me feel that I am engaged in the language of the soul? And I think some of the little words that light up for me are understanding, in the sense of, oh, that's an experience that I have when we're communicating at a soul level. A sense of the meaning or the meaningfulness of something. Like seeing a swirl of froyo and seeing the symbolic nature of it. Oh, that's like how we are a combination of both spirit and body of matter. So something about meaning, purpose, symbolism, like the deeper level why. Oh, that's why. And I have that experience. That seems to be something that's going on at this soul communication, soul communion. I'm so glad that you brought up that word, Elizabeth. Well, I'm going to let you muse on if you'd like to be the person to offer Cliff a vote of thanks today, while I tell you about next week, in which we are going to take up the topic of dancing in the rain. I'm really hoping that we will have that little video. I think it's Jean Autry who's singing in the rain. We are going to have someone speaking to us from the tradition of dance, and it's someone most of us know pretty well. Kevin Capretto, he's the one who has been our staff member behind Gems from the Wisdom Traditions for most of the time we've been offering it, starting in 2020. So it'll be really nice to have him back again. So is there someone who would like to offer Cliff a little thank you for his presentation today? Don't be shy. I know all of you want to, but Elizabeth?
How could I not? Thank you so much, Cliff, for inspiring us, for opening your broken heart to us. That's what heartbreak is about, breaking open. And I love your passion about language. We share that, and trees and a whole lot of other things. And I just can't thank you enough for what you've done for Lahaina, for your compassionate interest in the homeless, for everything that you stand for and do. It's always great to have you with us all. Thank you, thank you. Mahalo.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.